Hi there. My name is Namir. I'm from the UK, and I'm really excited to speak to you about this fascinating and fast emerging subtopic of the theme of climate risk. We've always conventionally split climate risk into two interrelated but distinct topics: physical and transition. We're already seeing movements in the transition risk space where asset owners and asset managers are increasingly embedding ESG expectations into their investment strategy, which is a really, really interesting move. And on the other hand, in the physical risk space, we weren't really expecting that to crystallize until much later in the century. And yet we're already facing natural disasters that are rocking entire nations this year, such as mass flooding in Southeast Asia and wildfires and heat waves spanning the globe. But the reason I'm making this video and speaking to you today is about a third equally interesting and yet under-talked about issue, and that is something called climate-related litigation risk, or CLR for short. Climate litigation risk refers to lawsuits and cases brought to judicial courts on the topic of climate change. And they can range from allegations of greenwashing to measuring data on scope 3 emissions to having too many emissions in the environment, which can violate a duty of care and violate basic human rights. These cases can span a huge number of topics in all different directions. And that's a really fascinating space because that's only going to grow when precedents get set. Now, there was already a fascinating landmark case where the Royal Dutch Shell were effectively compelled to reduce their emissions by 2030 and make sure that their transition plans were credible and not overly dependent on technology that just doesn't exist yet. That's huge and a real moment to illustrate how a company is being compelled and told by law to be better and to act responsibly towards the climate. And that's only going to set the ball in motion for other companies and other sectors to follow suit. It shows just how powerful this tool can be. And already we're seeing so many interesting cases, such as aviation companies being sued for misleading claims, to a farmer in Peru suing an oil and gas company to say that the impact that they have had as a business on the climate has had a knock-on implication on a glacier in Peru. You know, we are in a completely new world when it comes to being able to measure impact and being able to hold companies and people responsible for it. Now, what does that mean for the financial services sector? And that's a valid question because the majority of these cases are focused towards the oil and gas sector and utilities and ones that are really carbon intensive. But actually what we're seeing is that being extended into financial services. I'm co-authoring a paper right now on that topic with the Climate Risk Financial Forum and the PRA to discuss this actual indirect and even in some ways direct impact. So let's talk about insurers for the moment. It's affecting the asset and the liability side. From the asset side, their investment strategy is becoming increasingly scrutinized and increasingly open to lawsuits. For example, if they invest in a company who in turn faces a lawsuit which can affect their stock price or their market value, or even, if significant and severe enough, could even cause a credit rating transition, that would have huge ramifications on the investor, whether it's through corporate bonds, whether it's through equity investments, which are a little bit rarer for most insurers. We're facing and seeing some real knock-on impacts on the asset side. But more interestingly, if you are seen to invest in a company that is actively contributing to climate change or being sued in turn, the insurer and the investor itself can be seen as financing climate change and financing those activities, which in turn can be sued through climate litigation. And we're already seeing precedent for that. That's really interesting. We've always seen positive actions towards investments as a good thing. But now we're starting to see a movement towards penalties for inaction or poor action. Meanwhile, on the liability side, it's a lot more unique for insurers, but equally, if not more interesting. Insurers' D&O cover and PI cover, and just cover for firms more generally, means that they might incur some huge settlements and claims going forward as climate litigation crystallizes and causes more payouts and more precedents being set in the coming years. We've already seen an example of oil and gas companies suing an insurer in America on the grounds that their legal costs weren't being covered for them trying to defend a climate lawsuit. So we're already seeing insurers and financial sectors being dragged into this space. This topic is developing right before our eyes, and the impacts could be huge. If we think about the asbestos impact on the insurance world just 20 years ago and think about what the impact of that was, this is much more wide-ranging and much more impactful, and yet we're just not ready for it. Insurers aren't talking about it enough or aren't conscious about this risk enough to be responding accordingly, and that's a really, really scary thing to come to terms to, which is why I'm actively trying to bring this topic to attention and make sure that it's being dealt with accordingly. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There are definitely actions that insurers and financial institutions can take, such as going through the policies that are most exposed, such as D&O lines, and quantifying that impact, measuring what the potential exposure could be under a variety of scenarios and stress tests, where the scenarios refer to different legal precedents being set across the world. So what happens if this case goes through on its merits? What happens if that case goes through? And making sure that insurers are aware of that. In addition, making sure that they're engaging with the counterparties that they are significantly exposed to. So any oil and gas company that they provide cover to, there is that two-way engagement to make sure that there are credible transition plans in place. There are actions in place to protect them from these lawsuits and effectively be more responsible and more engaged with the move towards transition and a sustainable world. This risk is real and happening before our eyes, and it's only a matter of time before it crystallizes to the point where actual losses are being discovered. And so it's so important that insurers are ready. Thank you.